the late 1800s, revolutionary innovations like the railroad and electricity reshaped society, ushering in a new era of rapid development. Among the many changing industries, food manufacturing stood out during this period of industrialization. The quaint notion of farm fresh faded away as assembly lines and corporate giants like Quaker dominated the food industry. Seeking to satisfy the masses, they introduced vibrant, long-lasting products, resorting to chemical additives and preservatives in the absence of widespread refrigeration. Chalk whitened milk, while formaldehyde preserved meat. Ingredients were often undisclosed, allowing harmful chemicals to infiltrate the American food supply without regulatory oversight. Amidst this era of uncertainty, a light of awareness rose in the figure of chemist Harvey Wiley. Leading the Department of Agriculture in 1883, he was relentless in his pursuit of food purity. Upholding his mandate from the beginning, Wiley sought to expose the deterioration of American health through covert adulterations, laying the foundation for a revolution in food safety. Harvey Wiley was born on October 18, 1844, in Indiana. As both a farmer and a preacher, his father held a firm belief in social justice. Thus, an essential belief was passed down to Wiley. He was a child of the land and someone who sought to provide for others. These foundational values would steer him towards his future career. Wiley would go on to study chemistry and eventually accept a chemistry profession position at Purdue University. In 1878, his path towards food purity began with a sabbatical to Germany for nutrition study. The experience left Wiley with insight into the world of food manufacturing through the British 1860 Adulteration Act, the first food safety legislation in Europe, exposing him to the spectacles of food safety. As Wiley wrote, "I carried back a passion for examining food products, especially sugars." Upon his return, the Indiana State Board of Health ordered him to investigate adulteration in the sugars and syrups on sale in the state. Almost every syrup and honey he tested was fraudulent. These findings resulted in backlash from the honey industry, who dubbed his results the Wiley Lie. In 1883, Harvey Wiley left Purdue University amidst criticism from trustees over the unsavory attention he was garnering. Shortly after, he assumed a pivotal role as chief of the Division of Chemistry in the Department of Agriculture. The division's humble beginnings as a small room in the basement may have seemed insignificant, but it marked the solidifying of Wiley's role in the food industry. Over the next decade, he would undertake extensive and exhaustive investigations of adulterations, culminating in the publication of Bulletin No. 13, a detailing of the Bureau's findings. Despite efforts to introduce pure food bills to Congress based on said findings, they were constantly thwarted by powerful food corporations. Wiley would later lament, "The interests opposed to pure food legislation had good success in smothering any attempts on the part of the committee to bring out such bills for serious consideration." Slotted neatly in place amidst this tumult of corruption, the Spanish-American War erupted, tasking greed-driven meatpackers such as Armour with providing food for the nation's troops. These companies cut corners, leaving soldiers to consume rancid, poor-quality meats with the odor of embalmed bodies. The event was dubbed the Embalmed Meat Scandal, marking a pivotal moment in which public outcry surged against these appalling practices. Such focus was helpful in the fight against impure food. However, the deeper issue of chemical adulteration had yet to be addressed. Wiley already recognized the potential risks associated with such contamination, but had not yet analyzed the full extent of their effects on well-being. Seeking answers, he turned to the most reliable source he knew of, an experiment. Believing that trying it on the dog was the most convincing way to obtain results, he was allocated $5,000 from Congress in March of the same year to conduct his proposed ideas of the hygienic table trials, during which he would feed 12 young, robust fellows 3 meals daily. Half would receive pure food, while the others would be served its adulterated counterpart. With everyone's diet strictly controlled, it would address Wiley's concern, whether such preservatives should ever be used or not. Wiley's first trial looked into the common preservative borax, which, over 7 months, revealed that consumption of the chemical led to stark decline in health for the young men. Illness struck over half of the group and forced them to drop out, unable to endure the entirety of the trial. Wiley called upon Congress in his report to think about the protection of the young, the sick, and the debilitated, to entice the implications of food regulation. News of Wiley's experiments began to spread through newspapers, headed by George Rothwell Brown, a columnist in the Washington Post. After publishing his first piece on Wiley's group, titled Dr. Wiley and His Boarders, he found a replacement for the name Hygienic Table Trials, coining the term the Poison Squad. Amidst the controversy, congressional hearings were scheduled for a possible new food bill. Despite passing the House, the bill was swiftly shut down in the Senate by corporations who lobbied against Wiley's work. This failure forced Wiley to realize he needed a more impactful way of approaching Congress. Politicians remained unfazed despite the indisputable evidence. He needed something that would guarantee their attention. Women's voices during this period were becoming even louder as social barriers were torn down. Wiley would go on to meet political activist Alice Lakey. Together, they gained the support of women's groups across the country, like the National Consumers League, writing and speaking to Congress about food legislation. In the wake of their alliance, large food manufacturers such as Heinz pounced on the opportunity to gain the public's trust, fueling this awakening economy with food marketed as pure. By February of 1905, Wiley's march for pure food was taken to the White House. Backed by his allies, he confronted President Roosevelt with pure food legislation. By December, Roosevelt declared his backing of the law in a cumulative report to Congress. In June of 1906, amidst the debate for Wiley's pure food law, headlines from novelist Upton Sinclair recently published The Jungle captured the public's attention. It exposed the unsanitary realities of the meatpacking industry, such as the contamination of meat with rat feces and tuberculosis-riddled cattle sold as healthy. Alarmed by what Sinclair wrote, President Roosevelt initiated his own investigations, uncovering similar conditions. These revelations sparked public outcry, promoting Roosevelt's immediate demand for a Meat Safety Act. The whole nation was finally discussing food safety, putting Congress under pressure from every direction, a moment which Wiley seized for his own lobbying. By the end of that month, 2 laws were passed. Both the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act were signed into law on June 30, 1906 by President Roosevelt, the first federally regulated law to ensure the safety of food for the American public. These 2 acts had been the most pivotal laws in the history of food purity, marking the beginning of the legislative journey on the issue. The public recognized Wiley's crucial influence, simply calling the Pure Food and Drug Act Dr. Wiley's Law. Over the next 2 decades, Wiley would continue his advance towards food purity as the head of the Bureau of Chemistry, tasked with enforcing this new legislation against the sale of misbranded and adulterated food and drugs in the U.S. This was partially accomplished through further poison squad trials on benzoic acid, sulfuric acid, and his final trial, formaldehyde. Unfortunately for Wiley, the success of his bureau soon caused his unwavering dedication to become a source of frustration to his superiors. He would later resign from his position as chief chemist on March 15, 1912, after constant confrontation by his boss, Secretary James Wilson, and President Taft placing restrictions on the research he could publish. Just 2 weeks later, he accepted a job at Good Housekeeping magazines as the director of the Bureau of Foods, going on to create what is now the GH seal of approval. Wiley continued educating readers on the imposing dangers of adulterations, advocating for food safety practices ahead of his time. Despite the reforms, he felt strongly that there was more to be done, and so he spent the rest of his years continuing to be food regulation's strongest advocate, even through worsening health. Harvey Washington Wiley died June 30, 1930, exactly 24 years after President Roosevelt signed the 1906 law. His tombstone read, "Father of the Pure Food Law." 3 years before his death, the Bureau of Chemistry split, creating the FDA. 11 years later, in 1938, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was passed, providing the FDA with its first significant governmental authority to oversee the labeling and safety of food, drugs, and cosmetics before they reach the market. These large advances have helped save many lives, even as food safety remains an ongoing point of discussion today. Wiley began the conversation in 1878, forging the foundation for pure food as it has grown and evolved to this day. New adulterations, such as synthetic dyes, remain debated, and we still need people like Harvey Wiley to make a difference by speaking out against perpetual norms. Wiley's unwavering commitment to the pursuit of pure food culminated in the groundbreaking Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, revolutionizing not only the nation's approach to food regulation, but also the very fabric of American safety standards. Though Sinclair is commonly recognized for his book The Jungle as the final catalyst, Wiley laid the law's groundwork from the start, studying and fighting for food regulation for decades. Wiley built an integral part of the U.S. government. His legacy goes beyond legislative victories. It reflects a fundamental shift where every citizen's welfare becomes a central concern of governance. Wiley's resilience forever shaped the nation's health moving forward. He was the father of food safety.
To the great benefit of the people of this country and to the protection of our health, which is the most valuable asset we have, and our pocketbooks.